Hello everyone, it is I, Ryan, also known as the Lovebat, and I am here to play another RPG which I've kind of grown fond of in some ways, and in some other ways it's still frustrating. You know, it's kind of I don't know if I call it a love-hate relationship, but this game can be a bit rough around the edges, but I really like it anyway. Kind of the same way that some other RPGs might be in some ways where, you know, you want it to be perfect, but you kind of realize halfway through that that's just not going to be the case. But I've played this game before. I'm not super familiar with like all the Pathfinder tabletop rules or anything like that. I only recently just purchased the downloadable PDFs on Paizo's website. So I'm not super familiar with the tabletop rules, the deities, the lore, things like that. But from what I played of this game before, I played it maybe a year or two ago, and I just kind of didn't pick up back on it, and recently went through some things in real life. I recently moved about a month ago, so I didn't really have a chance to get back to playing this, but I did have a chance to play it for a little while, and got a good way through the game. Didn't finish it, but I figured that if I was going to get back to playing it, I might as well just do a Let's Play of it. And I'd always thought about doing a Let's Play of this kind of RPG, because it's obviously, you know, Dungeons & Dragons is the most popular kind of tabletop game. But, I heard some mixed things about Pathfinder, and I didn't pick it up until maybe a year or two after it released, so it had time to get patched up and all this stuff, and clear up some of the rough edges. There's still some issues with it, and obviously my computer's kind of old, so I have to run it on the lowest graphical settings for most of these options. I have the texture quality at medium, so that way the custom portraits that you can use for your characters, the quality of the portraits that appear in-game are based on the texture quality setting for some reason. So if you have the lowest texture quality setting, then if you use a custom portrait for your character, it ends up looking blurry as shit. So unfortunately I can't really do that with the texture quality to try and help my computer out, but we'll see how this goes. I played it with medium texture quality before. The computer tended to do fine running it that way, but later on in the game, there will be some slowdown regardless of the settings. Just from my own experience, I think it's because they used Unity as the game engine for this game. Alright, so we're just going to do the main story here. Maybe at some later point I'll get to these two things, which are essentially the DLCs for the game, which are more side content to expand on the main campaign. So maybe at some point I'll get to doing these after I do just the main story playthrough. And I guess, full disclosure, yes, it's true that this isn't a blind playthrough. I've played through this game once before, but it was quite a while back, so some things aren't really fresh in my mind, except for maybe the opening type areas, which I played through again to kind of have an idea of what kind of character I would want to do for a Let's Play, and to kind of remember all the controls and stuff. But aside from the first couple of areas, I don't remember the game quite as well, even though I played through a good chunk of it. So we're going to do a custom difficulty setting here. We're going to do it just like normal. Everything gets a fair shake. Nothing's easy or notoriously difficult. I'm going to do Dead Companions Rise after combat, mainly because combat can be kind of snowbally for a while, and even later in the game it can kind of be like that. From what I've found, this is a game that relies a lot on AC tanking, so you just need a super high armor class to just avoid getting hit in the first place, and then if something gets a critical hit, then you just have enough hit points to tank the hits that are guaranteed to hit you. So that's just been my own personal experience. I don't know if in tabletop it's different from that, but at least in this particular game, if you're not an AC tank, then you're not really a tank, unfortunately. Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, from the many times I've played that, you can tank things just by having a lot of hit points and trying to resist a lot of damage or to have damage mitigation. This game isn't really like that. It's more about just have a super high AC and make sure that the only way to hit you is by way of a critical hit. So, dead companions rise after combat. I'd recommend playing with this unless you're just wanting to do a super hardcore playthrough with as much sort of metagaming and power gaming as possible to make sure that this isn't an issue. I mean, there is a Death's Door thing here, which I'm going to turn off because my dead companion is going to rise after combat. Death's Door is basically kind of like you don't die, but if you get taken down again, then you will die. In my experience in games, if a companion dies, or if you lose a couple of party members, it's so expensive to resurrect them in lots of games that you're better off just reloading your save. Because especially early in the game, you're just not going to have enough money to resurrect companions that die. So I'm just going to do this just to make it easier, so that way if people die or get killed, then I don't have to worry about it being permanent. Because, I mean, that's just the way that combat is. It gets kind of snowbally out of your favor sometimes, so I just don't want to have to deal with that, because that's just going to slow things down, and it's just a pain in the ass, basically. I mean, that's just the cold hard truth, is that, I mean, in tabletop it might be different, but in this game, I mean, if you don't survive, then you don't really get to do anything. The game stops. In tabletop, you can roll up a new character, but in this, you just have to reload your game. So, now, in my previous playthrough, I played it on normal difficulty for the kingdom management, so later on, at some point, you'll end up having to rule over stuff, essentially, without going into spoilers. So you just have to rule over lands, basically. I found that, I mean, kind of similar to this option right here to make it more convenient for combat, I feel like some difficulty things are just kind of arbitrary, and it's more based around dice rolls than I would like it to be, rather than actual strategy or decision making. So, like, there's DCs for different things, like difficulty ratings, basically, for certain tasks, and you kind of have to put people in a position to do those things, or put the best people for the job in a position to do those things. And so there will be difficulty things that need to be met, difficulty ratings basically, when someone does a task for you as you delegate. And I felt like far too often it's just a dice roll. That's all it really is. So there's no real strategy behind it, other than maybe the flavor of your choice. You can still have conversations with people, and so being persuasive as a leader can have an effect on things somewhat tied to kingdom management. But I'm just going to do effortless, because I found that normal just caused me to save and reload more when things went really poorly, and I don't want to have to constantly do the save scumming type thing to avoid my kingdom falling into disarray and then the game ending that way, which can happen, which is really annoying. Because, like, if you play the previous RPG like Baldur's Gate, which is a big example, or something similar to that, you don't want the game to end because of kingdom management and people getting mad at stuff not going so well. You want it to end because you got beaten, like, in combat, or maybe you just made a really poor dialogue choice and then everyone turned on you, or some other thing like that. But the game ending because of kingdom management and unrest or things like that, this isn't really a game that's designed around that necessarily. Like, it kind of is, but you don't want to lose the game because of it. So I'm just going to put that on effortless. And so I'll still make the decisions, but I just don't want my game to just end because of this. So I'm going to leave that off. Immersive mode could be interesting for people that don't want to have to worry about all the on-screen stuff, and they can just make it a more thematic role-playing kind of playthrough, possibly, if they went with like an easier difficulty setting, perhaps. For me, I just like to leave it on, just so that way I can kind of know what's going on in combat, because it's real time with pause, so you need to know what's going on and what's happening. And then these are things like this is another hardcore mode kind of thing, to where you just have one save slot, and you can't do the save scumming type things that you might normally be able to get away with, saving and reloading type stuff. But anyway, let's go and get to the actual game here. I think that all this stuff is where I want it. Negative effects. Yeah, so I'm just going to leave that off. That way, like, it does get annoying, the negative ability stuff. I mean, I could put that on just to make it a bit easier to deal with, so I don't have to worry about that too much, but I want to go with as close to tabletop as possible, or as close to the rules as possible. Just making it to where the game's not going to just end, or be a, slowing down to a crawl. So I'll go with that. You can still remove certain things on a rest or cast restorative magic to get rid of things. But yeah, we just want to go for a smooth playthrough. And so you saw back there, I'm just going to do this real quick. You see back here that they do have some pre-made characters. And I mean, that's all well and good, but you're almost always better off just making your own custom tailored character. If you're trying to just learn the game and you don't want to go through character creation yet, then maybe you can start off with one of these and play the tutorial type section, then go back to making your own characters, so that way maybe you can understand how the game works and what class that you might want to be based on that. But you probably have a general idea of what the classes play like, maybe not so much their features and abilities, but if you've played tabletop of anything else like Dungeons and Dragons or any kind of fantasy type game, you kind of have an idea of what the classes are going to do in general. So these are all the portraits and stuff. As you play through the game, some of these portraits are unlocked because of NPCs in the game. And then some of these portraits are just things that you get by default at character creation that come bundled into the game. So most of these right here, these are basically all in-game kind of portraits that are provided, and I mean, they're very good, I might add. Granted, some class options or race options don't have too many options, but you generally have enough to work with here to where if you can't find a custom portrait, or if you don't have the money to commission an artist for a custom portrait, then, I mean, you still have lots of options here. I think this one on down are generally NPC options, except for maybe this one. I think this is another. I think these three right here are maybe DLC or additional portraits. I know that one of the pre-made character portraits was this one right here. And then these are just some custom portraits that I've had that I've considered for other characters, but I'm going to be going with this one. In order to do a custom portrait, you have to have the portrait size, a certain size for each size image that you have for your custom portrait. So this is one size, this is another size, and then this is the full size. And you have to fill out the borders of just blank material if you want your portrait to be recognized by the game, I think. So that's why that black area is there, and that's also why the black area is here with this portrait right there. If the portrait's big enough, you can mostly fill out the portrait space, but it has to be the exact dimensions for the portrait. So it looks kind of weird, but in game, the majority of the time we'll just be seeing this portrait, or this portrait right here, I think, is the one that we'll see the most on our main screen with the other party members, basically. And so I'm going to be playing a woman here, and so I'm going to choose the other gender. There we are. And so this is actually from a portrait pack for the Baldur's Gate games, the old Baldur's Gate games, and that's why the portrait is a bit smaller and doesn't fill out the entire full-size portrait very well. But I thought this is a cool portrait. It's freely available, so I don't have to worry about, people, I don't have to worry about the usage rights and stuff. I will go ahead and give a link in the video description for this, where the artwork comes from. It's from a DeviantArt portrait pack. So it's actually pretty cool, and I like the portrait itself, and I think the art style is great, so really kudos to the artist for the great artwork. And so you have a bunch of options here. We'll go through what they're going to look like here. I think that's fine. And then hair color, it's kind of like a brownish, kind of like a mix between brown and dark orange maybe. So let's see if we can kind of find what's a good hair color here. That might be close. And it's not really a bright color. I mean, that might actually be it right there, just the first one. It's either that one or that one, I think. Yeah, I think we'll just go with this one. That looks fine. And we'll see if we can find some kind of braided hairstyle here, like hers. That might work. We have another one. Well, that might be close enough. Yeah, I think this will work. And I think that the race that this might be was something similar to maybe like a halfling or a half-elf, or, you know, it's a very ambiguous portrait for race, so there's really a lot of different directions I could go with the race choice. I guess as sort of, I'll give just like a brief overview of the different races here. For anyone that's not too familiar with Pathfinder, and I mean, again, I'm not too familiar with tabletop, but there are probably some similarities to tabletop. And this is the first edition Pathfinder rules and not the second edition, which came out more recently for Pathfinder. So Pathfinder Kingmaker does use the first edition Pathfinder rules for just kind of a clarification there. Alright, so you have humans. It does give text descriptions of the race. I'll scroll through here a little bit, and you can pause the video if you'd like to read these. But it's kind of generally just more background lore of how they're characterized in the setting. And then the actual mechanical things are here at the top for you to read more easily. So humans, and the human was what I played with my first character in my initial playthrough that I kind of didn't get back to. But they're actually quite strong in this game. A free feed at the start is obviously very nice. And skilled basically means that an additional skill rank means that you can just pump more skill points into your skills, which can be pretty helpful if you don't have much of an intelligence score, which helps you gain more skills each time you level, and puts more skill points into the skills that you know, basically, and what you can be really proficient in. You can just pump more skill points into your skills each level as a human, and the free feed is nice. +2 to any one ability score, so you can be pretty versatile as far as the class that you pick here. Originally, I think I played just like a plain human fighter archer kind of character, which was very effective. I mean, it's probably the best non-magical damage dealer that you can get from my experience. So if you are a new player or you're unfamiliar with Pathfinder, you can just play a plain human fighter, and it's very, very viable for combat. And I think every class gets persuasion as a class skill that they can become very proficient in, so you don't have to be pigeonholed to a certain class to be a good talker. So, I mean, if you can't just go wrong, you can't go wrong with just doing a fighter. It's actually a pretty good class from my experience as an archer. And if you want to be an AC tank fighter, it can obviously be quite good for that too. So humans are pretty versatile, and the free feat and skilled makes them pretty effective if you want to go a certain route, certain kind of character. Elves, traditional, pointy-eared, maybe more pointy-eared in Pathfinder than they might be in D&D, where the pointy ears are a bit more subdued. But they get some different abilities here. Keen senses, basically. Along with some other races, they're better at perception. Kind of similar to D&D 5th edition, where they get free proficiency in perception. Elven magic, so they make very good spellcasters as far as, overcoming magic resistances and saving throw type stuff. So when you cast a spell on a creature, they might have innate magic resistance to resist certain kinds of spells. And so instead of, say, getting advantage on a saving throw and re-rolling it twice or something like similar to D&D 5th edition, creatures that have spell resistance can kind of bypass the saving throw, at least to my understanding goes. So you have to overcome the spell resistance, then they might get a saving throw or something like that after that. So yeah, spell resistance or magic resistance is a pretty big deal later on, if I remember correctly. Elven immunities, they get bonus saving throws against certain kinds of effects, which can be occasionally nasty. In tabletop, it's probably a bigger deal. But in this game, there are some potentially nasty things to deal with later on, with spells and things like that. Weapon familiarity can be useful for particular weapons. Or if you want to play a class that doesn't normally get a bunch of weapon options, then you can use certain weapons. But it's good for the exotic type weapons, if you want to use an exotic weapon without having to invest like a feat into learning how to use it. And of course there's the text description of elves. And so yep, they kind of get a bit of a description there. Dwarves, kind of similar to how they are in some other kinds of settings, but so yep, their speed is never reduced basically by armor. So you can wear heavier types of armor, I think, with a lower strength and kind of get away with it. Usually it's pretty useful for a spellcaster. Stability, so there's many different maneuvers that are used in this game that instead of forcing saving throws, as like Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition does, instead you have like combat maneuvers that are used by various different enemies. A wolf, for example, instead of forcing like a saving throw with an attack to not try and knock you down, instead they'll use a maneuver, and so you have to have combat and maneuver defense for things like that. Saving throws are usually via spells instead of like Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition have many non-magical effects that would force a saving throw. In Pathfinder, lots of it is combat maneuvers, and so you have to have a completely different set of defense to deal with that, which admittedly, again, is kind of tough to deal with because it's hard to spread yourself out and try and tank everything. So it is kind of a nice bonus there, because being tripped and going prone can be potentially nasty. But yeah, that is a big difference between Pathfinder and D&D that I've learned. Hardy, self-explanatory. You get another saving throw bonus based on your race to some different effects. Poison can be semi-common, obviously, so that's obviously quite nice. And a +2 bonus to saving throws against any kind of spell is obviously very useful later on. And defensive training, so there's some racial types of things that you get against racial bonuses that you get against certain other races that you apparently do not like or that you can fight pretty well against. So they do better against orcs, goblins, and giants. And of course they're going to show up in the game, otherwise you wouldn't get these bonuses. So at some point you'll encounter creature types like that. And then again they get the keen senses that some of the other races do for better perception and more exotic type weapons that you can use with dwarves. And obviously, as you can tell, you also get some racial stats up here as well. So dwarves get it, but some races get bonuses and penalties. So they get a -2 penalty to Constitution for elves, but +2 to Intelligence and Dexterity. Dwarves +2 to Constitution and Wisdom, but -2 to Charisma. The Charisma penalty kind of sucks if you want to have some persuasion going on there. You could potentially get that very, very low if you wanted, but not sure if I'd recommend that. It'd be kind of nice if you didn't get penalties to charisma. Like a penalty to dexterity would almost be acceptable and compared to charisma. But yeah, every race gets it in some way. Gnomes and halflings get a penalty to strength, etc. So you can pause the video and kind of take a look at what bonuses and penalties the races get. Gnomes, again, like elves, gnomes make very good spellcasters. Getting the bonus to charisma makes them good as a charisma caster class. Gnome magic, so they get some bonuses to saving throws, and they get some, again, more saving throw bonuses, and they get some bonuses to knowledge roll checks. So there's different sort of lore type checks in the game. So gnomes, along with being good spellcasters, they can be good as far as some of the different lore type checks in the game and perception. And so they can be very good spellcasters, and they can be fairly well rounded. Obviously, with their penalty to strength, you're probably not going to see them as frontline fighters unless you wanted to make some kind of, maybe a paladin of some kind that was dexterity based for like attacks and different things. So, I mean, there's certainly a lot of things that are possible. So, lots of things are possible. But they tend to make, you know, very good kinds of spellcasters, in my experience, or secondary classes that can kind of rely on one of your mental attributes. I'll just go and scroll down here for the Dwarven flavor text. Very hardy race. The race that I think I probably want to go with will be an Aasimar. Halfling would also be pretty acceptable for the kind of character that I might want to make, especially with Fearless, with the racial bonus on saving throws against fear. I don't know, I might go for Halfling anyway because I like the saving throws and maybe the possibility of making them a frontline tank that doesn't rely quite as much on strength to make it interesting. I was also thinking maybe of doing a Paladin, but I'm not quite decided. Oh, excuse me. I'm not quite decided yet on what I want to do with them. But yeah, Halflings, they get some nice saving throw bonuses with Fearless, so along with Fearless and Halfling Luck, that means they basically get a +3 bonus to saving throws against fear effects. And so you don't want, if you're a martial type character that's trying to deal damage, then being taken out of the fight isn't very good by fear type effects. So obviously these are pretty good bonuses. Slow movement kind of sucks. At least out of combat, it doesn't really slow you down. This is more just in combat, so you're not going to slow down the party with out of combat movement, thankfully. And gnomes, similarly, you know, they have the slower movement as well. And then I think dwarfs also have that, but they're not slowed down by armor, so that's always nice. And then sure-footed, so they can make some of the sort of physical-based checks much more often, which is quite nice. I don't know why it says gnomes there on slow movement, but unfortunately that's not something that got patched out, at least with the version that I have. So they have a bit of a more lengthy text description here for halflings. And then half-elves, kind of similar to humans. They get some of the elven defensive bonuses here, but they're mostly similar to humans. Skill bonus, that's another skill-based, skill-boosting kind of feat. So it's kind of similar to the bonus that humans get. Basically, it just allows you to, you know, have better skills, basically, and you get to choose one of your choice. So, and then, yeah, this is, I guess, it'll have the elf description here, I guess. But I guess, yeah, it does kind of go into the descriptions of not just the elven part. But yeah, half-elves, obviously, very versatile type race, just like humans. They can be many different classes quite well. Half-orc, surprisingly similar to humans in that, you know, you don't get any particular bonuses or penalties. You get a +2 to 1 of your choice, or to, yeah, +2 to 1 ability score of your choice, basically. And they get skilled like humans do, so you can pump your skills up with more skill points. Intimidating, so if you want to intimidate people with your charisma and persuasion, it can be pretty good with that, and there are some feats that go decently well in this game with intimidation checks. So you don't necessarily have to use intimidation for your dialogues if you don't want to be that kind of character. You can still be a goody two-shoes character of a half-orc and still get use out of this by way of some of the feats that you can use that kind of scale off of your ability to intimidate. And then again, more weapon familiarity, so you can use certain weapons that others may not be able to without feat investment. Orc ferocity, this is something that can come up more later on. It's not the same, obviously, as the 5th edition D&D, which is a better version of orc ferocity that puts you at 1 hit point if you fall to 0 hit points, and then it's like a once per day kind of deal in D&D 5th edition. But here, not quite as good, but if you have a healer that can heal you before you get killed or whatever, before you fall back down again, then it can potentially be useful. Personally, I haven't found it quite that good. It's definitely nowhere near as good as the tabletop for 5th edition half-orcs, or for the D&D 5th edition half-orcs. They get it better than the Pathfinder Kingmaker half-orcs, but I mean, it's still situationally useful, just not as useful. But this is probably one of the better bonuses if you want to use certain kinds of feats and do that kind of stuff with them. And of course, if you just like the flavor of half-orc, then that's quite fine too. Aasimar, the other race I was considering playing as, they get like they're the only race choice here that I think gets like actual sub-race options, the character creation. So you can, it's very common, at least in some other kinds of tabletop type play, to get a sub-race choice. 5th edition D&D does it. I know that 2nd edition Pathfinder can do it, from what I've read of the handbook for 2nd edition Pathfinder. In this particular game, Aasimar is the only race that you get to choose a sub-race with. So that's pretty interesting and makes them pretty flexible. And they get this, which gives them basically a bonus on saving throws against becoming blinded or dazzled. So if you can avoid being blinded, then you don't have a debilitating condition that makes it hard to hit people with attacks. So that's obviously quite nice. It's still situational, but when it comes up, you'll be glad to have the bonus, just in case. Celestial resistance, this can be quite good, especially if you have spellcasters or characters in your party that like using area of effect type things, like spells or like throwing certain kinds of effects into the battle. And if you're a frontliner, then having some resistance to those kinds of spells or features can keep you going in the heat of combat, because having that resistance can just kind of make you tankier in that way. So it's one of the better forms of damage mitigation, is having sort of elemental type resistances. And of course it goes for enemy features and spells as well. Flavor-wise, Aasimars are kind of similar in flavor to the way that they are in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. So they're very celestial-like and that kind of thing. And then the heritages can have different bonuses, kind of similar to the 3 heritages that you can choose for your Aasimar sub-race in 5th edition D&D. And that also makes them pretty flexible in the classes that they can be as well. Then the last one is tieflings, and tieflings, as far as I know it, were not actually in, or they weren't playable in the original game, and I don't think that they were actually featured in the original version of the game at all. They weren't introduced until a DLC came out, maybe like a year or so after the game came out, which introduced a new NPC companion, and then also made tieflings a playable race, and also added some tiefling portrait options for your character creation. So they also have, I guess tieflings have a heritage option too. Sadly, you wouldn't have been able to play tieflings in the original game to be able to check these out. I guess I haven't played a tiefling yet before, or haven't tried them out in this game, so maybe just slipped my mind that they also get sub-race options here. But similar to Aasimar in that, you know, they might have a hard time fitting in thematically sometimes, whether it's due to society or just due to them being untrusting of people. But Fiendish resistance may be arguably better than the Aasimar resistance, because they get fire resistance, and so fire in most any fantasy setting is a very common damage type. You know, spells like fireball and different sorts of fire-based effects, or if you throw like a potion that does fire damage and explodes or whatever, then obviously Fiendish resistance will kind of keep you safe from a good deal of area of effect type things. Whereas Aasimar, they don't get the fire resistance. Instead, they get acid resistance, which, of course, is not anywhere near as prominent as fire would be, but the other resistances are still good, though. So yeah, that's just a rundown of the races. And then, based on your heritage, you'll get some other bonuses, particularly with your stat boosts. So, elves, dwarves, gnomes, and halflings, they get certain bonuses and penalties to stats. Namely, they get two races get penalties to strength. Elves get penalty to constitution, and dwarves get a penalty to charisma. So they're a bit more specialized, but they're still, I mean, you can still make most anything work. You can't be a charisma caster as a dwarf, at least not very well, but there's a lot of other classes that you can still be with these different races. Elves maybe have it the worst, because Constitution is going to be helpful for most anyone, but they do, if you want to use certain kinds of weapons, then, or if you want to be a spellcaster, then they're still pretty good for those things. But yeah, some races are kind of specialized, but you can't go wrong with playing any of them and trying to make something work, even though it might be a bit more difficult. So, I don't know, do I want to go Halfling or Aasimar? I was thinking, for saving throws, obviously Halfling does quite well, but there's many different heritages of Aasimar that you can play, and gives you some versatility going on there. So I'll at least go ahead and show, I think, some of the resistances, or I mean the heritages, I guess. Though it is kind of hard to make someone that looks like the portrait based on the in-game stuff here. So let's see what we can get here. That might be the closest, maybe. Sadly, there aren't very many hairstyles for the Aasimars here, which is kind of like, I don't know why they don't have more hairstyles for some of these races. It kind of doesn't make much sense to me, but I mean, I guess we could just go with that, and then this is more just a flavor choice, I guess. Doesn't really matter what your dominant hand is, I think. Halfling or Aasimar for this character? Halfling or Aasimar? Well, I think I'll just go with... Oh, it is a tough choice. Both Halflings and Aasimars can be good AC tanks with features and feats that they can get for frontliners. Aasimars are definitely better damage dealers because Halflings are smaller sized, and so they'll deal less damage because of that. You know what? I'll just go with an Aasimar. I think we can make this work. I think we can probably make it work pretty well. And then now we have the class, and so it kind of sucks that you can't pick your heritage before you pick your class, because if you don't know what the heritages are, then how are you going to know what class you want to pick based around your heritage's abilities? So I don't know if that... Maybe the version I'm using is too old, and maybe they patched that differently, maybe in a later patch that I'm unaware of, but as far as I know, this is the most recent version of the game, at least for this. So what class do we want to be? Well, I mean, there's many different options here. You have your classic frontliner stuff like barbarians, fighters, paladins, rangers, or damage dealers. Alchemist is like a potion-based kind of class, and you use different things to enhance yourself with different mixtures and potions, and you can throw potions to deal damage and cause havoc. Barbarians, classic, strong man, can go into battle and, rip people up pretty good in combat, and they also get their rages and rage type abilities and some different subclass abilities, depending if you pick one. Bards, stereotypical kind of bard. They're a charisma caster class. They can do bard type things with inspiration and things like that. Clerics, same kind of deal there. With they're the kind of archetypal sort of, they can heal, but they get many other different abilities and spells, and you get certain deity and domain type bonuses, and you can get certain kinds of proficiencies like with weapons that way. In tabletop, I'm sure there's more elaborate things going on with the deity selection and your domains. In this game, it's a bit more simplified to be like weapon proficiencies and maybe spell type choices. Druids, again, nature type class. Haven't really played much of a druid, but I'm sure they're fun for people. I just haven't gotten into them in most fantasy type things. Then we have fighters. This is what I played originally. I don't know if I'll do it again, maybe. Might want to try something else here. But you can be both a melee fighter and a ranged kind of archer type character with a fighter. And you can be a tank, you can be a damage dealer. There's quite a few directions you can go with them. Inquisitor, they're kind of similar to paladins. They're kind of a mix between paladin and cleric. You do get some spells and things like that, but I haven't played too much with one. But from my knowledge goes, they're kind of like a martial. That's a mix between cleric and paladin. Just kind of different thematically, some different abilities, but you generally play them as a martial, weapon-wielding type character. Kineticist, admittedly, this is probably the class that I'm least familiar with. I haven't played with them in any capacity. I do know that they are considered quite strong from what I've read in some cases. You can get some really powerful builds going with Kineticist, and so you can potentially make a pretty powerful character with someone like that, and maybe mixing in like an alchemist or something like that. It just really depends on your knowledge of the game for being able to make a kineticist work. I wouldn't really recommend them for new players because I've tried getting a handle on how they work. It's just not really flowing with me personally, but I'm sure that other people out there would probably love them. So, knock yourself out if that's your thing. Magus is kind of the Pathfinder version of like a Blade Singer in some ways from Dungeons and Dragons. So they're kind of the sort of sword mage kind of class in this game. And so you tend to fight with primarily one weapon and not using another weapon or a shield. So you just go toe to toe with just one weapon, and you mix in spells and things like that. And you can also make some pretty compelling builds with a Magus kind of character. So maybe at some point I'll do something like that. Monks, self-explanatory. The main difference with them, obviously, compared to maybe other tabletop type settings, is that you have strict alignment restrictions for them. this is a big restriction, not so much for yourself, because you can be whatever alignment that you want when you create your character, but it is a big limiting factor in multi-classing for NPC characters that you come across. There are very few NPCs that you come across that can multi-class into monk just because they don't fit the alignment. Go figure that not many NPCs that you find would actually be of a lawful type alignment. So, but it can be strong for multi-classing. I haven't played it as a single class yet, but I imagine it could still be fun. I just don't have much experience with it playing as a full class. I only have experience with it as sort of like dipping with a multi-class to kind of enhance other class abilities for other classes. Paladin, very nice. Obviously, very strict alignment restriction, but you know, if you don't want to deal with the alignment restriction, or if you want to play an evil type Paladin, you could play an Inquisitor, I suppose. But a Paladin is some similarities to how they function in traditional type fantasy and Dungeons and Dragons. Very archetypal kind of, you know, knight in shining armor type characters mostly. But with one big difference I found, in that you get a Divine Hunter subclass, which allows you to be an Archer Paladin, which is something that Dungeons and Dragons has never really had, which I think makes things interesting. So obviously you lose out on some things if you play the Divine Hunter. Like this, for example, Aura of Courage would be nice, but if you're a Divine Hunter, you don't get Aura of Courage, but you do get other things. So it's a very compelling type character to be able to play. And you still get, similar to Aura of Protection for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, you get Divine Grace, which is similar to that. You get your Charisma bonus, or Charisma modifier, basically, on all of your saving throws. You don't do it with an Aura, I believe, which does limit how well it works with the party, but for yourself, it's obviously quite good. Maybe the baseline Paladin gives you the Aura to give it to your companions. I'm not quite sure here. So I guess you can kind of give... Yeah, you can give your allies bonuses to some kinds of saving throws with an Aura. But as far as the Charisma bonus to your saves, I think that you only get that to yourself, not to your allies. But all things considered, it's still a great bonus for making a character. And then Rangers are kind of similar to Fighters. You just get some different flavored abilities. You can get an Animal Companion. Their subclasses are a bit different. I haven't played with any of these before. Haven't looked too much into them. You do get some interesting spells, which can make for an interesting Archer-type character. But yeah, it's an interesting class. It's not borked the way that the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition Ranger was for quite a while. You can be a potentially strong damage dealer as an Archer with a Ranger, while getting some other secondary type bonuses, favored enemy, and then you get some extra feats to enhance a way of fighting in particular. Rogue, you kind of know what they're like. You get some subclasses that do differentiate them quite a bit based on what you might want to do. Knife Master can be particularly interesting if you just want to go for the small weapons and just rely on smacking people early and often. Thug is kind of like, I think it's like a strength-based kind of rogue. I haven't played with one yet, but you get... It's like the way to make a strength rogue that's just like a bash-your-face-in kind of rogue. But they can be interesting. They do get sneak attack, which is kind of similar to the way that 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons does things. You can dish out lots of damage with a single hit, which obviously can make, well, Unfortunately, in Pathfinder, it does not make your critical hits super good because it's not multiplied on a critical hit. But it is nice extra damage that you can usually activate pretty often. Okay, well, let's see. Oh, there we go. I was using recording buttons and whatever, so I was kind of trying to figure out if I needed to pause the video or not. But now I'm back. Where was I? I just need to catch my breath real quick. So yeah, you have your rogues, which are your standard archetypal type things. Obviously, you can do them, non-traditional rogue character if you want for flavor, but you do get some interesting abilities, evasion, probably something that people are familiar with, and uncanny dodge. Different in Pathfinder compared to 5th edition D&D, but and then you get rogue talents, which can give you additional bonuses and abilities, and the ability to do all kinds of rogue stuff better, or to do use different weapons or features. But yeah, it's a very interesting class, definitely viable, and Slayer's kind of similar to Rogue. They do get sneak attack damage, kind of similar to a Rogue, but it's not quite as high as a Rogue, but they're definitely good damage dealers. They're a bit more martial-based kind of Rogue, and they're kind of similar to, I guess you could call them a mix between a Ranger and a Rogue, because they're definitely more martial focused than a Rogue is. As far as they're more combat focused, I guess I should say. Rogues have more out of combat based features and bonuses and more defensive features, whereas Slayer is more of a, alright, let's just pump out damage, let's use our weapons really well and do the thing. Some of these subclasses do differentiate quite a bit from the standard kind of just damage dealing type Slayer type character. And then you have spellcaster type things with the sorcerer and wizard, which are the two main spellcasters. Like cleric and bard, they can have many more secondary type spells, and then sorcerer and wizard get into more familiar territory as far as, the usual kinds of spells that you throw around, like firebolts and fireballs, or defensive magic to protect yourself, things of that nature. They're pretty traditional. Sorcerers are charisma based, and then wizards are intelligence based. So they're fairly similar in some respects, but obviously the big difference is that a wizard gets a spell book, and the sorcerer just picks spells as you go along. So obviously a wizard is a bit more flexible because you can add spells to your spellbook later on, and a sorcerer cannot. But sorcerers, they get their own sorts of bonuses, and they get some bloodlines here that can potentially lead to some interesting things, like an Imperial sorcerer, which is similar to, I think, like it's a sorcerer version of a cleric, which is interesting. And then you have these are what you call, I think, prestige classes, so you have to meet certain prerequisites, which essentially means that not only do you have to meet the prerequisites, but you also have to be a high enough level to be able to meet the prerequisites and take those levels. So Stalwart Defender, you can't start taking levels in that until you're level 7 because your base attack bonus that it pictures up there, basically your base attack bonus is generally equal to your character level. And so you have to be character level 7 before you can start multi-classing into that. And same here, if there's a skill that's required to be out of 4, that basically means that you need to make it up to 4th level before you can even consider taking this, or before you can be capable of taking it, and you have to know all those different skills and things. So Arcane Trickster is basically, if you're a rogue of some kind, generally it means you're either a rogue that's multi-classed into a spellcaster, or generally you're a Eldritch Scoundrel, which is basically the Arcane Trickster type rogue, comparatively to 5th edition D&D. And then you have Stalwart Defender, which is usually for fighters and tanks, paladins perhaps, things of that nature, so they're very tanky type class. Eldritch Knight, you know, similar to Eldritch Knight in 5th edition D&D. They're very martial focused casters. So basically, I haven't really played much with them. I wish I could show you the features and abilities for them. Alright, so you can kind of look at them here if you right click. Kind of. It's a lot better if you can see it all on the screen right there. So, but basically, it's a very sort of martial-based caster class, prestige class, basically. And then Dragon Disciple is interesting because you have to be able to cast spells, but it also gives you some durability-based bonuses. So no draconic bloodlines and no special sorcerer classes. So yeah, you get lots of defensive bonuses and lots of frontliner type bonuses that you'd think would... it's interesting, you have to have caster levels to be able to take this, and Arcana, or Arcana. And you get lots of frontliner bonuses with Dragon Disciple, so it's interesting, and there are some NPCs that you could have taking some of these prestige classes, I guess you could say. Mystic Thurge. This is kind of like a cross. This is like crossing cleric and sorcerer in some ways. Maybe cleric and wizard. A little bit too. That's basically what it is. So if you can... I mean, I suppose if you're high enough level Paladin or Inquisitor, you could also be a Mystic Thurge. Or Mystic Thurge. I have a hard time pronouncing that. But yeah, essentially, they cross the two kinds of spell casting. It's kind of like what a cleric mage would be in the old school 2nd edition Dungeons and Dragons. The cleric mage multi-class, where you just all spell casting all the time. But they get some extra kinds of bonuses to aid those kinds of spell casting if you're set on it. And I guess combined spells, it's basically a way to kind of combine the two classes together without having to split the levels so much. So that's kind of what it's for, as a prestige class. Duelist is mainly for... Duelist and Aldori Swordlord are mechanically similar in the fact that you take these if you want to be a frontliner that tanks without having to be too reliant on heavy armor. Like, say, for example, you want to be a duelist or an Aldori Swordlord, and you want to be an AC tank without wearing a bunch of heavy gear, be dexterity based. Those are basically what these two things are. Mechanically, I mean, there are definitely some differences, but for builds, they're basically mainly for trying to tank in the front lines, just in different ways, and generally with AC. And they do have some, you know, different defensive features that they each get, and occasionally offensive features. So yeah, you just ways to get bonuses to your AC are generally what these two prestige classes are for. Duelist is obviously easier to obtain with the prerequisites because Aldori Sword Lord, like, look at all the skills that you have to have. So if you dump intelligence, it's kind of hard to become an Aldori Sword Lord because you just need so many different skills to meet the prerequisites. So if you have a specific character in mind, you could be a Sword Lord, but meeting the prerequisites means that you have to kind of plan ahead quite a bit. So I think for the purposes of this character, I think I'm going to go with a Paladin. And then, do I want the auras or do I not? I mean, it would be nice to have them and to be able to provide them. Immune to fear would be nice. But I do get the Divine Grace here for bonuses to all my saving throws. So, I mean, we can go with Divine Hunter maybe to try it out. You do get you get a free feat here, which makes it easier. I mean, it's a necessary feat for a ranged character. I mean, it is a very interesting class that I've considered doing, and I tested out a little bit when finding out what I wanted to play. I mean, there are some interesting ranged bonuses of being able to bond to a weapon, and then you get some shared abilities here to grant to other ranged characters, and also to be able to use lay on hands at range is actually kind of interesting because you get like a ranged healing without having to go up right next to them. So that's potentially interesting and pretty useful. Hunter's Blessing. So you have, yeah, Smite Evils is similar to Divine Smite, except it's more of a persistent kind of ability here. So you choose only one target, and then you basically just get bonuses when you start attacking them. And it's only, I guess, if the target is evil, so you gain extra, you gain extra bonuses. Smite evil if it's an evil aligned creature. So more situationally useful compared to Divine Smite for 5th edition D&D. So Divine Hunter can expend the use of their Smite Evil ability. So I guess Hunter's Blessing maybe not quite as useful as I thought it might be, because most characters who are archers that you want to have in the back lines are probably already going to have those feats if they're an archer at all. It would mainly be for spellcasters or characters like that which lack those feats, that aren't doing tremendous damage with ranged attacks. And then you also have other kinds of paladins here as well. So let's see. So I guess the difference is that you have less Smite Evil going on, and no Mark of Justice. Okay. So what do you get in place of it? You get Aura of Life. So that's a slightly different approach, I guess. You get Aura of Life. Not sure if there's anything else that's different. Maybe there's certain kinds of mercies that you can take for lay on hands that offer up something different. And you know what, why not? Let's try something different that I haven't tried before. Let's go ahead and give it a go with an Aasimar Hospitaller Paladin. Now time for the Heritage. Now obviously you can see that they all get different bonuses and penalty, or not really any penalties, but they're all just basically just, these are the main bonuses that you get aside from your celestial resistance. And so there are some different flavors to these as well. And obviously certain kinds of classes will want certain kinds of bonuses. Dexterity and charisma, dexterity and wisdom. So not all of them are charisma based. There are some that are based on, let's see, strength and charisma, wisdom and charisma. So that can be a pretty good option if you want to do the Mystic Thurge prestige class, since you get probably the only race that I think may get a bonus to both wisdom and charisma, or wisdom and a spellcasting stat. I don't know, maybe there's a tiefling heritage I haven't looked at that gives those kinds of bonuses. So you can get some pretty good clerics and some pretty good charisma casters, and obviously you can have a good paladin as well, because you have some charisma based bonuses here, and paladins definitely want charisma. Lawbringers, interesting, because you get bonuses to persuasion and perception are quite useful, and hold person can be potentially useful. I'm assuming that the spellcasting stat for these racial spells is the non-physical stat that you get a bonus to. In this case it would be wisdom, I assume. In that case I assume it would be charisma. For this one, I'm not quite sure. Might be either or, maybe whichever one's higher. I haven't really tested those out yet. So this one is interesting. Dexterity and charisma, racial bonus on persuasion and mobility. And glitter dust is an interesting racial spell. Persuasion is something you'll use pretty often in this game. More ways than you think that you might use it. As you can tell before, if you're ruling over lands, being persuasive can be pretty good to have around. And when you need to convince people of things, you want as much persuasion as possible to ensure that you're going to be successful, basically. So yeah, definitely persuasion is the biggest difference in dialogues, and there are some lore-related checks that come up in dialogues as well at some points in the game, so those are also viable. Mobility and athletics. Strength and charisma. The racial stat, or the racial skill bonuses for Angelkin aren't quite as good, at least for the majority of characters, but if you want to play a strength-based kind of paladin, we could do that. But I'll probably just go with dexterity and charisma here. We'll see how this goes. Alright, and then this is basically a point buy type system. So you just have certain ability points, and the more that you raise a score, then the more that it can cost. You can see right here it costs more to raise it. It costs 2 points to raise it at this point. Then eventually it'll cost 3. Then eventually it'll cost 4. And then the highest that you can have it is 20 if you have a racial boost. So obviously, being a paladin, we want more than just dexterity, of course, so you want some charisma as well. And obviously having the racial boost to it will make it easier to raise it higher, because then you can get it up to 16 without the cost to raise it being quite as high. So so if we're going to be a paladin, we'll definitely need to figure out, we want to go dexterity based, then obviously strength will be very useful for athletics. But I think we can maybe afford to have it a bit lower. The one big problem, though, of having strength lower is that you can use less. You can't use quite as much gear. You can't equip as much gear at one time without being encumbered, and you don't want to have encumbrance because then it limits how much AC that you can get with your dexterity. You end up tiring out more as far as growing tired with encumbrance-based things. Basically, you end up getting fatigued and growing tired more. So that's definitely something to consider. So let's do Constitution then. Could do this and it would probably be okay. Could lower strength a bit more, but that does make it problematic with equipment and gear. If I lower intelligence, I don't get as many skill points to play around with. So I think I might leave it at this. I do want to raise my wisdom. But, because the wisdom saves are basically will saving throws. Dexterity is for, those are for basically just dexterity saving throws. Reflex saving throws, that's what they call them. So you have reflex saving throws of dexterity, and then you have fortitude saving throws of constitution, and then will saving throws of wisdom, which is, I think that's how 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons did saving throws. They did it kind of like Pathfinder 1st edition did it with these rules. So we want persuasion most definitely, and then I think I'm going to take mobility, because if you want to go ahead and be an AC tank, you want a little bit of mobility, so that way when you use features to fight defensively and to try and not get hit, then having mobility will make you able to fight in a defensive manner much more often. So even though it's not a class skill, I mean it could be a class skill if we end up multi-classing into something else at some point. But yeah, you get some of these lore-based skills, and then trickery is for like picking locks, doing things like that, and disarming traps, which can be very hazardous to your health in this game. Stealth sometimes comes up, but maybe not as often as you would think. But it's useful to have at least one character that's good at that. Athletics and mobility, similar types of abilities, but one is strength and one's dexterity. So there are going to be some cases where you'll definitely want both of them in your party. Use magic device. This is basically just for magic items like wands and scrolls. If you want a certain character to use them that's just outside of your class, basically outside what your class would normally be able to use, then you have to make a use magic device check. And the more powerful the item, then the higher the DC to make the check. So it can be useful for like bards or different other classes that maybe are limited in some kinds of magic, but if you can use a wand or a scroll, then you can still cast certain kinds of spells. And because it's charisma based, bards make a pretty good class for using this skill. I suppose paladins might be good too if you wanted to use magic device, but this is basically a bard skill at its core if you want to use different kinds of magic stuff. Magic goodies. Perception is pretty important. Thankfully, perception is something that, as long as you have full party, you have lots of other party members that can spot things for you. So if I had more skill points to play around with, I would definitely put one in perception, and maybe through multi-classing you can make it a class skill to get a boost to it. But for now, I think we're just going to go with persuasion, which persuasion and perception probably the two most important. And then these other things, you want at least one person in the party to be pretty good at those. Mobility is mainly for defensive type stuff in combat, and the racial bonus is quite nice as well to kind of combo with that. So yeah, I think this is going to be probably what we go with. Could go lower on the wisdom and then just raise charisma for a bonus to will saves and to all other saves. I'm not sure if we can really do that. Yeah, I can only get one more point in there. If I lower intelligence, then -1 points. Yeah, so I think could go with lower strength and lower wisdom to raise charisma. I think I'll just have to do it this way, I guess. I mean, we can always raise charisma later and just keep it at 17, so that's not exactly bad either. And yeah, I think for a character, I think it's interesting. And the charisma bonus to our saves will, you know, come up for sure. Ideally, I'd want to be raising my dexterity, but yeah, it's just the way it goes. Maybe I can raise charisma up by 1, then raise my dexterity after that. Now this is a big part of the character, and that's your feats. Let's just use we'll choose the deity first. There are different deities in Pathfinder. I'm not too familiar with them. They have their different flavors and different things like that. But I think if you're an archer, Erastil is a pretty good deity to pick because right-click it. Favorite weapon is a longbow, so you can. So if you're an archer, you're already going to win proficiency in that, or play a class that has proficiency in it. So it's mainly useful for clerics that want to be able to pick away with a longbow, I think. And maybe an inquisitor might get some use out of these, because I think they choose a deity as well. So you have different deities here, and I think that the majority of these are good aligned type deities. I guess Aldori can be chosen by lawful evil, and Abadar can be chosen by lawful evil. But yeah, the majority of the deities and the majority of the classes in general, you know, it's usually a good idea to be a good aligned character early, or if you're on your first playthrough, or if you're not too familiar with Pathfinder, good aligned is usually a good way to go. Allows you the most freedom as well. Being evil doesn't always have its perks, so. So that's a long sword, that's a scimitar. Scimitar we might be able to use. An armed strike. Could be interesting. I guess if you take some monk levels, that could certainly be interesting. But of course, if you take monk levels, it's usually a good idea to have some wisdom if you plan on going unarmed or unarmored type of combat. Ultimately, it may just be more down to flavor. Yeah, I guess we'll just go with Lady of Valor. Aasimar. We'll just choose a sword-based deity. I don't think it really matters much for a paladin where you already have proficiency in all your weapons already. And then we'll go with. There's lots of feats here, obviously, and you can show the unavailable ones that you have to work towards and meet the prerequisites. So there's lots and lots of potential choices here. So you have to kind of figure out how you're going to build a character. And this, because there's lots of feats you can choose, you kind of have to go down a certain path. And so in going down a certain path, you know, you just kind of have to just roll with the fact that you have to kind of figure it out from level 1. You can respec your character later. There's an option in the game to do that, or there's also a mod that can do that as well that I have installed. So, and then you can also occasionally have feats that you can take based off of your race. So an Aasimar later on can take the Wings feat, and this basically gives you an extra bonus to your AC. So that can be very, very good if you are a frontliner, which is what I'm going to try and be, I think. And then we'll just take Weapon Finesse and Weapon Focus. We'll choose that later when we've decided more on what kind of weapon that we want to use. So let's go with Weapon Finesse. This will allow us to use our Dexterity modifier instead of Strength for the attack rolls. For damage rolls, we're going to need another feat for that, basically. Which kind of sucks that we're not going to really be dealing damage, but it is what it is. And then you get your different voices here that you can select. I think this is the female voices, and then those are the male voices for your character. If you're a Paladin, you have to pick Lawful Good. It won't allow you to pick the other ones, but I'm sure if you wanted to mod your game to pick a different alignment, you could. Most certainly. And then the name for her is going to be the name that I gave her when I considered playing her with a D&D character, Alyrra Nephodel. And then the birth date, I mean, it's not terribly important. It does have some bearing on the game from what I remember for some time-based events, but ultimately it's not really a big mechanical difference from what I remember. So you can go with many different voices.
Contemplate on your mistakes.
Follow if you dare.
I did it! I do not find this to be useful.
Let's move.
Strike with all your might! Hold on, just a little more. Our path leads on. Stand with me.
So, you know, that might sound like a pretty good voice. I'm not sure why you wouldn't have a voice set, I guess. Maybe you don't want to listen to your character. You want them to be a silent protagonist, kind of like Link, I guess. Or maybe if you just don't want to deal with the voices, you could do that. But there's an option in the options menu to turn off the vocal commands or things like that, or selection sounds. So you can also do that instead.
Enemy approaching! Let's move already. Aim carefully. Let us be no contest. I feel faint.
I will see this through. Contemplate on your mistakes. I do not find this to be you. Hold on, just a little more. Our path leads on. Stand with me.
Stand with me, everyone.
We shall overcome.
And we shall overcome. Alright. So is there anything I want to change? I could lower the dexterity a little bit, so that way I could raise wisdom or charisma a little bit. But I want to kind of try this out. See if I can make a dexterity kind of character. See if I can make an AC tank dexterity kind of character work and kind of play a class that I haven't really played before, so. And I can certainly multi-class later to try and fit in things like with fighter or monk, perhaps. Try and figure some things out. But yeah, let's go ahead and start the game here. Let's see how things go here. And during the loading screens, you will occasionally have tips down here. Some of them are kind of useful, and some of them you'll just kind of figure out after a while just by playing. But
Our story
started at the mansion of an Aldori sword lord. Drawn by the promise of a most dangerous task and a commensurately huge reward, heroes of all stripes gathered here.
Alrighty.
Where are they? This is taking forever. It didn't even say what this was for, just that the Aldori were looking for heroes. Who are the Aldori anyway? Rich folk?
Alright, so I think I'll maybe change the settings slightly for the voices and the background noise, ambient volume. Turn the voice volume up a little bit, maybe. See if that works a little bit better. Trying to get the voice volume right to where it doesn't conflict too much with my commentary here. Just having it loud enough to where you can still hear the voices, obviously. Maybe slightly higher. Because you want to be able to hear the voices if they're on, obviously, during some conversations. But the selection sounds, you know, just don't want them to conflict with me talking.
If you can't be patient, no one's keeping you here. Just go back to your mountains or whatever hole you crawled out of. The Aldori Sword Lords run the premier school for the dueling arts. They're also the richest and most influential group in this part of Brevoy. Take that tone with them, and they'll teach you some manners pretty quickly.
Oh, I'm sure they will. Let's see, ambient volume down a little bit more. I think that voice volume might be good. One cool thing about the Pathfinder or the Pathfinder Kingmaker in the dialogue is that it will highlight certain key words or phrases or like names of factions or names of lands, countries, regions, some cases deities, different things of that nature. It'll give you some extra text that you can read. So you can kind of find out more about the lore of the game and the game world without having to look it up online or out of game, for example. So I kind of like that. It's not necessarily, you know, it's not like a codex or anything like that necessarily, but it's nice that it provides you the information on the spot to look at that.
All right, you purple toad, just shut your trap. And if you can't, I'll help you.
Hush! Quiet! They're coming.
And then obviously you can see down there there's also character portraits for characters that are talking and for your own character when your character comes up.
Greetings, everyone. I am Sword Lord Jamandi Aldori, and this is Lord Mayor Yosef Salimius of Restov. Welcome to my mansion.
So basically, this is Jamandi Aldori. They'll be a very, well, as you can tell, if they have a portrait, they're probably an important character. If they don't have a portrait, they're maybe more of a side character or just a regular kind of NPC. And she is a sword lord, so obviously very well versed in combat, and she kind of looks the part as well. And then Restov, basically, yep, you can kind of read more about it. But basically, you're in a place and she's gathered a lot of people here to hear her out about something.
We thank you from the bottom of our hearts for responding to our call. You may be few, but that's unavoidable. We need only the best of the best for this task. And I see true heroes before me, strong and fearless, exactly what Restov needs.
Yes, the best of the best of the best, just like the movie Men in Black.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Now, to the point. South of here, just beyond Brevoy's border, lies a region known as the Stolen Lands. This is disputed territory, and while it's long been claimed by nearby states, it's never been truly taken. I won't bore you with the legal technicalities. Suffice to say that anyone with enough courage and power to seize the stolen lands and name themselves Baron or Baroness, claiming dominion, well, none of the neighboring states would be able to challenge it. Of course, Restov would be first to recognize the legitimacy of this new state, as well as the noble title of its founder.
So basically, I think what she's talking about here, I mean, obviously, having played through the game before, I kind of, you know, understand the world a bit more now. But basically, the stolen lands are basically just, it's sort of a more lawless, not really lawless, but it's a place where people tend to value freedom. And there's just not really a whole bunch of leadership to enforce any rules there right now. That's why it's called disputed territory. It's been claimed, but no one's really ever ruled over it. There's no real leadership. It's just, it's what people might call a clusterfuck of who actually is in charge of the stolen lands. So, obviously, it's a big reason why she's gathered a lot of the best here.
Unfortunately, one serious obstacle stands between you and this title. A gang of bandits holds sway in the stolen lands. Their chief, who they call the Stag Lord, considers himself the rightful owner of these lands, and no one has yet been able to challenge his power. Bring me his head, and you'll be able to return to the stolen lands as their legal ruler. Any questions?
Alright, so basically she's offering the people here, in particular you, the ability to rule the stolen lands as a legal kind of El Presidente. You know, you are the king, you are the captain of the ship. Presuming that you succeed, of course, and it's not going to be easy. But yeah, you can scroll up and kind of read through the dialogue if you need to backtrack a little bit. Obviously, I can't go back to the previous conversation between the other NPCs, but you can scroll up a little bit here in conversations. This will be useful later on when you want to figure out how you want to respond to certain kinds of NPCs and look at what they've told you and make a decision in important conversations. Sometimes you might want to scroll back up and read through the dialogue. So, essentially, you have the Stag Lord, which believes that they hold power over the stolen lands and that they are the rightful ruler. But apparently, Jamandi just, obviously doesn't like him, which you can ask. Why not just recognize the Stag Lord as the Baron?
That's a good point. As I see it, this Stag Lord already holds power over the region with confidence. Many noble bloodlines were started by bandits who just got lucky, weren't they?
Perhaps because we do have standards to maintain. This room has seen many celebrations of adventurers, and even those who just got lucky. But giving a noble title to a bandit lord? That's one thing that's never happened here, and it won't while I still breathe.
So obviously Jamandi doesn't want to give a title like this to someone that's considered just a bandit. Can't be just anyone. It has to be the best of the best, or someone that is deemed worthy of ruling the lands and isn't going to just be a flash in the pan, or a bandit that is oppressive or tyrannical. So, I mean, that's reasonable. And so obviously she wants you to get rid of the Stag Lord, and then you can rule over the lands that he claims to own, basically. So you usurp him from his title, and you go ahead and take over the throne for yourself, because she thinks that someone else can do it better than the Stag Lord. So there's definitely some political power plays going on even this early in the game, but at the very least your character is getting quite a bit out of it, and Jamandi Aldori is getting her own thing out of it. So Alright, so who exactly is going to get the Baron's title? I mean, look how many of us are here. So, yeah.
I will, of course. I'm the leader of this team, after all. Don't worry, though. I'll make it worth your while to help me.
We haven't yet begun, and you already speak of divvying rewards. What makes you think we'll even succeed? There's little point arguing over who gains the title when we'll most likely lose our lives there.
The fatalistic fellow. You'll get more of that as time goes on from this guy, I believe.
If I may please answer the question.
So yeah, you get text-based descriptions as well of things that the characters are doing. I'll do my best to read through them and not slow the game down too much, but basically...
We believe you're all equally deserving of a noble title. Over the course of your expedition, it will be up to you as a team to decide which of you is best suited to rule.
So yeah, that's basically just flavor text. Obviously the game is called Pathfinder Kingmaker, so you wouldn't be playing through the game unless it was you that was ruling over stuff. So that's kind of just like mild spoiler in the title. You're the one that's going to be ruling over it, not your companions, obviously. So like, but I mean, it's nice that they go through it realistically with the dialogue instead of just basically giving it away. Oh, you're going to be the one that's ruling it, no questions. Obviously, that other guy before, Tartusio, thinks that he should rule the stolen lands, and he's, you know, obviously thinks pretty highly of himself, but, yep, that's just the way it goes. Some people out there are like that. Alright, so you're helping us found the barony, so what do you hope to gain from this?
Don't ask stupid questions. Why should you even care? What they have to gain and why, that's for Lady Aldori and I to discuss. It's none of your concern. Your only concern is to swing your sword around, or whatever it is you do.
And your only concern, Tartusio, is to go ahead and shut your mouth, because you are very arrogant, my friend. That is your duty. My duty is to go ahead and fight for Paladin things, and your duty is just to go ahead and just shut up.
Of course, we stand to benefit from this enterprise. But if you're concerned that we intend to rule your country from afar, using you as a front, well, please know that these concerns are unfounded. Let's just say that we have a strong interest in the region's stability. We have need of a ruling power we can negotiate with, not bandit gangs and monster hordes.
So basically, she's looking for someone to rule the stolen lands that she can work with. So again, the political power plays and stuff like that, she can't work with the Stag Lord. The Stag Lord is just kind of doing his own thing, doesn't want to work with anyone else. But if she can put someone in his place that can not only rule the lands more effectively, but can also be worked with, then that stands to benefit her much more than the Stag Lord, which is, I mean, makes sense from her perspective, and it makes sense to get an evil, tyrannical type person out, in a sense. Because then it's better for everyone, I think, is what she's saying.
What is that smell in the air? Is it the smell of unspoken words and political intrigue?
Yep, and this is, as I said before in character creation, tieflings were not in the original game. This is an added-in NPC. So there's extra dialogues and interactions that are added into some scenes that were not in the original game. So if you find another Let's Play that was done more around closer to launch before the DLC came out, then you wouldn't have seen this character, which we'll learn more about as the time goes on. So, let's see. So what rewards are we expecting from this?
And what reward would you seek beyond a noble title and your own lands?
We'll absorb the costs of preparing and equipping your expeditions. Once you return victorious, Restov will also allocate you a significant sum to provide financial support for you to establish your country. Essentially, we'll help you build your capital. I hope such a reward is satisfactory.
Well, that's very enticing indeed.
Words, words, words. Significant, financial. I can't fill my belly with pretty words.
Yeah, point taken.
Of course. There will also be an official banquet held in your honor. All of Rostov's high society will gather to celebrate your feat.
Now you're talking.
Indeed, Amiri, indeed. I like a good meal myself, and so will Alyrra with her deep-pitted stomach. Alrighty then. So it's very clear what we can kind of expect from this going forward. We're here to go ahead and take out the Stag Baron, claim the stolen lands for ourselves, then hold a big banquet in our honor, and a partridge in a pear tree. But that's just the gist of it. There's going to be lots of other things that go on as well.
Excellent. You venture forth tomorrow. For now, you can take some time to get to know one another better. Or you can head straight to your guest rooms to get some rest. You'll find we've already prepared supplies for you there. And thank you again for agreeing to take part in this expedition. I wish you luck.
Well, thank you again for the luck.
Again, with all my heart, for replying to this call. The flare in your eyes reveals your courage, the unshakable will that distinguishes true heroes. I look at you, O champions of Restov, and doubt not for a second that you'll be victorious. So venture forth toward your feet. Go, and return in triumph.
Triumph we shall. Triumph we shall. And of course, to aid in our triumph, we'll probably have to save our game.
My name's Lindsay. I'm a bard, though this is my first real adventure. So, shall we go teach this stag lord a lesson?
Well, I mean, I plan on doing that. Let's introduce myself first. Pleased to meet you. I'm Alyrra.
Likewise. Actually, I also wanted to ask you something. How do you feel about this Tartuccio fellow? I think he's pretty obnoxious personally. He appointed himself head of the team, and he's just after the Baron's crown, or whatever it is barons wear. It doesn't matter. I don't like him. I think you should be team leader. When I first saw you, I couldn't help but think, now here's a real hero. Someone who'll be praised in poems and songs. This is the person I'll write my book about.
So, alright, well that's news to me. You're writing a book. Oh. I mean, obviously if you're more evil you can choose these other options, or if you're just, you know, I'm just a wanderer, I just came around here because I just, you know, wanted to put my skills to the test. But
Damn,
I'm curious about the
I should have
book.
led with that. Please, just let me explain. You know what the trouble with most heroes' biographies is? They're always written years later, based on the tales of, best case, people who saw things from the outside. Worst case, someone heard about it from their brother, who heard it from their friend, who heard it from their cousin, and so on, adding a new batch of lies each time. Every time I read about a heroic journey, I think to myself, why didn't they just bring a bard with them to write it all down properly?
So, as you can obviously tell, Lindsay is a bard. So you can probably kind of just tell from her portrait that that's probably what she is anyway. But, yep, a bard indeed.
And then I thought, I could be that bard. I just needed to find a suitable hero and volunteer to follow along on their glorious adventure. A great plan, huh? And here we are, with a heroic journey lying before us. Who's going to be the hero? Some dwarf who keeps muttering about how we'll all die? Or maybe that horrific scythe lady? Or God's forbid, Tartuccio? No way.
Ah, yes, the fatalistic dwarf, the scythe lady that just doesn't seem to like life at all, And then Tortuccio the Arrogant. Okay, well. And then you can obviously compliment Amiri. Oh. So what about that barbarian lady? She looks pretty heroic. Looks like she can get things done. A real go-getter.
Oh yeah, she's fantastic. You can tell she could tear a bear's head off with her bare hands, but she kind of scares me just a little. But, I mean, her sword's twice as big as I am. She could cut me down without even noticing. Just think on it a bit, alright? I'm sure you'll agree.
I'm sure I will in time. Let me think it over.
Alright, I'm going to my room to write about tonight. See you in the morning.
Yep, alright, so now we're finally in the main interface after all that dialogue and character creation, and you get the first chance to go and move around. You can use the tab key to highlight characters and their names, or to possibly highlight containers that you can open, or doors that you can open, things that you can go ahead and try and like pick a lock on, like a chest or something else. And then if you get the little magnifying glass icon there, which you can do with either the tab key or just having your mouse close by to it, you can click and you can get text descriptions of things in a room or outside, or that you find on the ground. Mostly these are flavor text, but occasionally you might get some interesting tidbits if you pass some kind of lore check or a perception check. So there are some interesting things that you can find here. And then if you try and talk to people, it'll just be text. So obviously not all of the dialogue is voice acted. For the opening sequence here it is. But beyond the opening sequence, lots of the dialogue is text-based. At least there's a good chunk of it is text-based, so we're not going to have to sit and listen to all of the dialogue be voiced, so we can just read through it a bit faster than the dialogue is voiced. What does Hurim say? Yep, the fatalistic dwarf. He just doesn't care. He just wants to die already. Doesn't know when it's going to happen. There's Tortuccio the Arrogant. And he thinks that he's already won the expedition, apparently. She's not used to feeling like a pawn, but such is the way of level 1 characters in RPGs in my experience. You, at least early on, are just a pawn in the way of life. A pawn in the game of life, as it were. And then down here, you have this tab, which is for features and abilities, basically non-spell type abilities. Over here, there would generally be a tab for spells that you can go ahead and put out, which we'll find out in a minute. For later on, when we add more party members, they'll have spells that we can bring up over there. Down here is a belt for things like potions and different other magic items that we might be able to use. And then here is the character creation screen. Well, I guess, I think the reason that we start off with a greatsword, even though we're dexterity based, is because of the deity that we chose. I think the starting deity affected what starting weapon that we get, and because the deity had longsword as their selected kind of deity, we are with a crappy weapon choice for our first weapon. So we're probably just going to go with a longbow, and then when we end up finding a melee weapon, we'll switch to the melee weapon that we can use weapon finesse with. But yeah, we're going to switch to the longbow for our main weapon for now. Because even though the yeah, you get a damage penalty with bows in this game if you have a negative strength modifier. But if you have a positive strength modifier, then you actually end up getting a damage bonus if you're using a composite longbow or a composite shortbow. So that's an interesting little wrinkle if you want to make an archer, that you can't really, or you don't really want to dump strength if you want to use a bow. that allow you to do more damage, and you don't have to deal with the damage penalties. Another thing that you can see here is that this is the encumbrance. So as you can see here, since the armor's too heavy for our encumbrance by a lot, and even the greatsword also contributes to that, so we can get rid of that to try and lower our encumbrance here. And so obviously your dexterity can't your max dexterity bonus down there, it says, is 3. So because we have a +5 dexterity modifier, and we're encumbered, we only get a +3 maximum dexterity bonus to our armor class. So obviously that's not a good thing. So we're going to need to find some lighter armor here real soon instead of scale mail. And then you can obviously see, before, this is the stuff on your belt. Right now we just have a potion of Cure Light Wounds. Self-explanatory. The saving throw there, I think, is if you try and use it on undead. So undead are hurt by healing magic or healing items. So, but yeah, basically it's just used to heal yourself. And then you see down here that you have other different kinds of abilities. Fighting defensively, probably something we're going to do a lot. This basically just allows you to be more of a tank, less of a damage dealer. Light halo, you manifest the halo, and it provides a little bit of light and gives you that saving throw bonus. And then you can remove it from there since it's more of a passive ability, so we don't need to activate it. This is the Racial Glitter Dust spell that we got from our Aasimar race pick, or our heritage pick for Aasimar. And then that's Smite Evil for the Paladin type stuff. So, and then Charge. This is an ability where you can charge into the enemy and you basically get an offensive bonus at the cost of some defense. And then Coup de Grace, that's basically for finishing blows and stuff, but unfortunately with real-time with pause combat, I don't find myself having the opportunity to actually use this. So while it is there, I don't really find myself using this because combat goes by so fast. And yeah, real-time with pause, you can't really take advantage of that very much. So, but it's cool that they at least have it in the game. So yep, there's more flavor text down there. Gorham is one of the deities. I think it's a deity that many barbarians worship because it's based around, you know, strength and might, I believe. Fighting fights and stuff.
Help!
Alright, so what's going on? Obviously there's going to be a wrinkle at some point, so what's going on
Mansion's
here?
under attack. We need to help. Some villains broke in and started killing everyone. I barely made it. Hurry, we have to help the guards fight off the attackers or we'll all be cut down one by one.
Alrighty then. Well, that definitely sounded like a scream. Yeah! Alright, so you have this little box down here is like it's somewhat of a text log, but it's also a big combat log. So we have our initiative here, 13 plus dexterity modifier. We go first in combat because of our initiative here. So this is basically general combat. You hover over, you click on someone, you can attack them, or you can target them with something if you hover over them and then click on them. If you're not able to target them with something such as like charge, you can't use a charge if you have a ranged weapon in your hand, obviously, so you can't select it. And then if something's active, it'll be like that with the light halo, where you'll have that that green square, or this little line that's going around it. Right, so we'll click on them.
Strike as one.
That's the voice command there. And then the red thing is showing that they're attacking me. And then if you have party members, they'll have a green line that will show that your party member is targeting someone else. And as you saw there, they got an attack of opportunity when you're using a ranged weapon in melee combat, basically. So you don't want to be at melee range, and you often will want to go ahead and switch to a melee weapon if an enemy closes in on you, if only for the fact that you don't want to let them have a bunch of opportunity attacks on you. Alright, I think the game is slowing down because I've been recording for a while, and so it'll cause a bit of slowdown in the game, especially as time goes on and there's a lot more going on screen. So I'm going to cut the video here. It's been going on for quite a while, and we'll go ahead and continue on with the opening tutorial section here and find out what's going on here in this little manor area that Lindsay was telling us about. There are assassins and evil people about that are killing everyone. But, yep, I hope that everyone enjoyed this episode. More of a character creation and introduction to the game kind of video. But, like with many RPGs, I get kind of lengthy and talkative sometimes with some aspects of games. But, hope you all enjoyed the journey of this first episode of Pathfinder Kingmaker, and I hope you join me for next time. Look forward to seeing everyone there, and take care, everybody.